doesn't matter what's for you whenever I see it.
To wonder, to watch, to weather, to whisper, to whimper, to will, to well, swell, to swallow, to switch, to swim, to swarm, to swing, to sing, to sting, to storm, to tone, to telling few for 5-minute clues, few selling to new blue suede shoes, few pulling tooth from rotten gum root, Sue sulking solo in giant gumboot, crew seeks to fill an open seat on the team, Lou plays the scale like the man of your dream, hearing the bass as you enter your teens, exit your life like collecting universal themes.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, August 14th, 2018. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live, steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, international correspondent for the New York Times, David Kirkpatrick, on his book, Into the Hands of Soldiers, Freedom and Chaos in Egypt and the Middle East. Also on the program today, it's primary day. If you're in Wisconsin or Minnesota or Connecticut or Vermont, go vote. Meanwhile, Peter Strzok fired, completing the purge of those at the FBI who were involved in the leadership of the Trump investigation, or I should say the investigation into Donald Trump. Meanwhile, the White House, it's revealed, forced its employees to sign unconstitutional non-disclosure forms. The Taliban appears to have taken a major city near Kabul as the who lost Afghanistan question will begin maybe anew, I guess. Seb Gorka apparently has made his own fake Fox News business cards. Not necessarily a news headline, but just too fun to ignore. Israel detains Peter Beinart because he wrote something critical of Israel.
Many things.
And the heartwarming story of a man on a hunger strike to stop a homeless shelter. All this and more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. Sort of a slow news day as far as these goes. Apparently, the big story is Omarosa has another tape. I mean, I guess this is all about her book sales and about revenge. And Donald Trump seems to be upset by the whole thing. But there is a news report. We will play at least the news read about the supposed tape that exists where staffers around Donald Trump are discussing a second video tape of him saying the N-word. I mean, is anybody surprised? Does anybody think it's going to do anything?
I am
NFL
shocked.
Is it about NFL players? Do we know what the context is for him to
No,
say
my
a word
guess
that
is,
I'm sure he often says.
based upon the tweet that Trump put out last night, that it has something to do with The Apprentice. Because apparently...
okay, right. But that rumor goes back years, that there's tapes they're sitting on from Apprentice outtakes and stuff where he said all sorts of things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, she's just, I guess, arguing that Trump's own people believe the rumors.
Right.
We will talk more about that later. But Trump did tweet out. Mark Burnett called to say that there are no tapes of The Apprentice where I use such a terrible and disgusting word as attributed by wacky and deranged Omarosa. That doesn't roll off the tongue so well. Wacky and deranged Omarosa.
I like how
His epithets have really fallen off.
I like when he says, like, that level of defensiveness in Trump is a very much.
Is that defensive to say that somebody called and said there's no tape of me saying something that I, of course, never ever said?
And also, I've never heard him.
He goes on to say
so negatively about racist language before.
I don't have that word in my vocabulary and never have. She made it up.
Dude, you're from Queens. Like, even if you were a great guy, that word's in your vocabulary.
Yeah.
You're 70 and you're from Queens.
Right.
Are you kidding me?
But Mark Burnett called and assured him there was no tapes of him saying a word that he knows he's never said.
Donald, I've looked through 800 hours of Apprentice footage and B-roll and nothing. I looked all weekend.
Nothing.
Yeah, Mark Burnett did that. He's
Just
like,
can't find that thing that you're convinced you never said.
There was the, like, bragging about rapes and wanting to F your daughter, but actually, shockingly, you never used the N-word.
Like, why isn't he tweeting out about all the other people who are calling him and saying, I don't have a tape of you saying that word either?
I, too. That should be a new hashtag for them.
Right.
I don't have a tape of the president saying the N-word.
Exactly.
Me neither.
BetterHelp, folks. We mentioned this yesterday, is an affordable private online counseling service. You get unlimited access to a licensed, trained, fully accredited therapist that's perfect for you on your phone, on your computer, through text, voice, video chat. Doesn't matter. They're LGBT friendly. It's really good for couples counseling. Anything else you're going through in life right now, check it out. All you need to do is go to betterhelp.com/majority. You fill out a questionnaire. They match you with a counselor who's perfect for you. You start counseling today. If you don't like that person, you don't jive with them, whatever it is, you can get another counselor. Super easy, super quick, and you're always connected. So you can basically have a session every day if you want. You can connect from anywhere, anytime. A lot of people are not comfortable talking to a therapist in person. Well, I guess not anytime. Maybe during work hours. A lot of folks aren't comfortable talking to a therapist in person, or they can't get there, or it's too expensive. BetterHelp also has financial aid, incidentally.
That's very cool.
Check it out. BetterHelp solves all these problems. You can sign up right now, save on quality professional therapy by going to betterhelp.com/majority. So Donald Trump yesterday, the president of the United States, was...
Mark Burnett assured me that I am the president of the United States.
Mark Burnett called me and
Mark
said
Burnett
there's no
said I'm not hallucinating.
tape saying that I have been impeached. Donald Trump went to Fort Drum to sign the Pentagon budget, which I guess is, well, it's quite large. It is $716 billion on the defense authorization bill, up $60 or $70 billion. Congratulations, folks. We're too bankrupt to pay for anybody's college or health care. But when it comes to pouring money into the defense contracting business, we can do that. This will give U.S. service members a 2.6% raise, the first they've seen in 9 years. He is speaking to the Army's 10th Mountain Division, which is the most deployed division in the Army. And here is Donald Trump trying to relate to guys who he clearly feels, somewhat insecure around, because Donald Trump, one of those guys who, back when the draft was theoretically impacting everyone, he skedaddled out of it. I think he had like plantar's warts or something like that. But here is Donald Trump.
Be close. More than $11 billion for the military construction, including family housing, and we are proudly giving our troops the biggest pay increase in a decade. And I know you don't want it because you're very patriotic. You'll say, just save the money. We're going to pay down debt. Does anybody not want it? Please raise your hand. What's going on here? Are these real patriots? I don't know, General. I don't know. It's the biggest increase in a decade. A strong military also requires a strong economy, and our economy.
There you go. The guy just can't land a joke in situations where there aren't people waiting for him to say something racist. I think is part of the problem.
Right.
Apparently, he also he refused to thank John McCain, who they have named the defense authorization after.
That's correct.
That is.
Well, that's just awesome.
Yeah,
that's the funny part.
It's I don't even know. It's so, all of it is so gross.
It's so alpha
that I can't even. The idea that you would want a bill named after you that is going to just create, at best case scenario, more misery for people. I can understand, like, you want your name on a bill that provides health care for people, or, increases people's, I guess, pay. Maybe that's part of it.
My God, you're so gay. John McCain, Jesus Christ. Seder's a friggin' fag.
There you go.
But
right.
Real quick,
if he's still around next year, will they call the next one the John McCain Authorization Bill number 2? Or will they call it the Meghan McCain Authorization Bill?
Right.
I mean,
they'll start calling it again after a Democrat is elected, and that will be like one of the Democrats. Like, we're going to start calling defense authorizations after McCain again for bipartisanship. We support Omarosa, right? Because anything that puts stress on Trump's heart is a good thing.
What? Why? I don't know what's involved in supporting Omarosa.
Well, just enjoying and
I enjoy. Yes. Am I enjoying it? Yes. Am I in any way supporting her? No. Would I buy
not
her?
as a person or buying her book, but just sort of generally like, oh, she said something that will upset Trump. Cool, let's play it and laugh at them.
Oh, definitely.
And we're enjoying it.
Of course, we'll do that.
I enjoy looking at how upset his meltdown about her was one of the ones where you really are in, like, you mad, like, he's really on it. I like that.
When is she coming on TMBS?
I'm working on it.
I think we have some footage of that. We'll play that a little bit later in the program. All right, we got to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to David Kirkpatrick. He is the international correspondent from the New York Times who wrote Into the Hands of the Soldiers, Freedom and Chaos in Egypt and the Middle East, when he was the Egypt bureau chief. We'll be right back.
Be close.
We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program international correspondent for the New York Times and the former New York Times Cairo bureau chief from 2011 to 2015, David Kirkpatrick, author of Into the Hands of the Soldiers, Freedom and Chaos in Egypt and the Middle East. Welcome to the program, David.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's start with today is the anniversary, I guess the 5-year anniversary of the massacre in Rabbah, where more than 800 protesters were killed in Cairo at Rabbah Square. And let's work backwards from there, and then we'll come back around. Tell us, just remind us who those folks who were killed in 2013 on August 14th in Cairo, and why.
You know, that's a great place to start. So the events leading up to that, there had been an uprising. Mubarak had been forced from power, the former longtime strongman. Egypt had elected its first freely elected president who happened to be an Islamist, Mohammed Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood. On July 3rd of 2013, Morsi was removed by the military. His supporters, most of them Islamists, held a sit-in in Rabbah Adawaya Square to protest the military takeover. And they were gathered under the banner of democracy, saying, this, our freely elected president has been overturned. We want a restoration of freedom and elections. Their sit-in lasted about 6 weeks before the military and the police rolled in and killed them by the hundreds. Other estimates put the number at about 1,000. Certainly more than 800 have been confirmed by Human Rights Watch. And it's a remarkable thing, if I can go on,
please,
because that's a bigger one-day massacre than Tiananmen Square. And it was painful for those of us who were there to watch. It's an amount of bloodshed that is really hard to wrap your mind around when you're in the middle of it. And I've puzzled quite a bit in the time since then about why it's not better remembered in the West. When the anniversary of Tiananmen Square comes around, we publish special sections in the New York Times. On the anniversary of Rabbah al-Adawaya, I don't think many people really even know what it is or what it means. And I have 4 answers to that I'll give quickly. One is the government did a pretty good job of keeping us journalists out. Some were killed that day. Some journalists who were just trying to cover the events are still in jail because they were arrested that day. The government's propaganda was very effective. Western governments who might have been critical of the killings at Rabbah, I think, hesitated a little bit in their criticisms because some of them felt maybe somewhat complicit. They hadn't spoken out against the coup, and so it was hard for them to really criticize the crackdown the way they might have criticized the massacre in Tiananmen Square or elsewhere. And the last one is, I think that the government's propaganda fell on ready ears because their pitch was these demonstrators, almost all of whom were unarmed, their pitch was that these demonstrators were armed and dangerous Islamists. And, we're, after 9/11 and after all the history, we're ready to believe that. I think a lot of Americans are already inclined to see Arabs and Islamists as possibly or potentially violent. And so it was easy for them to muddy the waters. But the one-sided nature of the death toll there, the fact that, as many as 1,000 people were killed, really tells a story. This was not an armed insurrection. And maybe to sort of I don't want to maybe sort of add like a parenthetical fifth reason that maybe you can go backwards in time from that moment to explain would also be that this was not perceived as the democracy movement anymore, which, from their perspective, it probably was, right? I mean, there was not, that's where this gets a little bit cloudy because the coup that took place was
in some ways, a failure of the movement to make Egypt more democratic.
Yeah, I would say more than in some ways. A coup is a failure at democracy. But, yeah, the contrast is interesting. You know, in 2011, we saw a sit-in in Tahrir Square that forced the old strongman, Hosni Mubarak, from power. And there were critical moments there when the military had to make a decision. Are we going to help the president by clearing out the square, or are we going to stand with the square and clear out the president? And that's the way they decided. And I think, in retrospect, one of the reasons why the generals decided that way is because of the diversity and breadth of the turnout in the square. That in Tahrir Square in 2011, you had Muslims and Copts, you had old and young, rich and poor, young and old. I guess I already said that, but you get the idea.
Right.
Everybody was there together, and it was the unity of that movement that made it impossible to turn against for the military. Whereas over the 30 months that followed, the factions had already turned against each other. So when Morsi's supporters were gathered, yes, they were holding up a banner that said democracy, but they were also holding up a banner that said Sharia. And other parts of the Egyptian population were turned off by that, were also suspicious of the brothers, and had been themselves fighting for power against the brothers. And when the civilians were divided, the military had an opening. It's much easier to demonize one sector or one part of the population than to turn against the population as a whole. And that's what they did. They managed to portray the Islamists as a kind of internal enemy.
Do you think, was it your sense that the military from the beginning, sensed that it would go this way? I mean, because in retrospect, it seems that, if you're going to have democratic elections in Egypt following the ouster of Mubarak, that it seems, I don't know, maybe it's just in retrospect, or maybe it wasn't, that it would be obvious that the Muslim Brotherhood would have won simply because they were the most sort of like organized singular force in political force outside of it seems to me in Egypt. Is that accurate? I mean, could they have foreseen this sort of like trajectory?
Yeah, we all did. Everybody thought the Brotherhood would win. It's interesting when we look back. Speaking on behalf of the Western journalists who were covering Egypt, everybody thought that the Brotherhood was best organized. They had been the only real opposition party under Mubarak. They had a large grassroots organization, and polls showed that Egyptians liked their ideas, so they were probably going to win. And we thought, well, this could be bad because they may be very conservative. They may try to turn Egypt in a really traditional or even intolerant direction, but at least they're competent. And we were wrong on both counts. When they came to power, they didn't really do anything noticeably Islamist. They didn't turn Egypt in a conservative direction in any discernible way, and they weren't competent either.
Yeah.
But they were welcomed to office by members of the military. Now President, then General Abdel Fattah Sisi, told friends and told American officials he was happy to serve under an elected president, even one who had come from the Muslim Brotherhood, that they deserved a chance to rule. After the coup, he began revising his own history and telling American officials, I always warned you, you could never trust the brothers. You should never have let them come to power. But that's revisionism. And at the time, he too was willing to give them a chance.
How sincere was he, do you think? I mean, do you think he had a sense that this may provide an opening down the road, or do you think he at one point became disillusioned, or at one point just saw the opening, and then all of a sudden all these feelings came upon him?
That's a fascinating question. And in my heart, I'm not 100% sure whether, in the terms of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, he was the Brutus of the story or the Cassius. Whether he was the arch conspirator the whole time, or whether he was prevailed upon to go along with the coup in the best interest of the country. But when the time came, he was looking out at a situation where the military, the liberals in Egypt were asking him to do something about Morsi. The powerful and wealthy Gulf states were saying, we'll bankroll you if you do something about Morsi. And the Coptic Church was saying, you got to do something about Morsi. And the American government wasn't, with a clear voice, saying, stay back. He was getting, at best, mixed signals from his American patrons. And under those circumstances, the temptation to step in must have been great.
Let's talk about the signals he was getting from the American government. Like, where was everybody in terms of their perspective on this? I mean, it's you write quite a bit about John Kerry. It seemed like there was a lot of people sort of freelancing through this process in terms of the American government. Like, everybody sort of had their own perspective and was acting upon it. It seems like.
Yeah, that is kind of the picture that emerges. The way you put it is just right. Where was everybody? There was a situation where 2 days before President Morsi was removed, President Obama was on the phone with him and was trying to counsel Morsi on how to hold on to power. He was saying, look, if you can build some bridges to your civilian opponents, if you can bring them in so it's almost a unity government, you can pull this thing out. And President Obama's advice was evidently sincere. I mean, he even cited the example of Nelson Mandela in South Africa, who Obama had just visited in his sickbed. And he was saying to Morsi, look, you should be like Mandela. You can be like Mandela and usher in a new era for your country. Meanwhile, at the same time, American-made F-16s flown by the Egyptian Air Force were already painting hearts in the sky over downtown Cairo over the anti-Morsi protests. And other voices in the government had already made known, including Secretary Kerry, that they no longer thought Morsi was tenable. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel, who'd been handed stern talking points to try to discourage Sisi from taking over, was really conveying the message that the most important thing was a close relationship and that the Americans were going to stick with him. And others inside the government, as soon as the coup happened, were openly applauding, and that includes Michael Morrell, who had been the acting director of the CIA through this period. So you can only say that there were a lot of mixed messages. Oh, and we should mention Mike Flynn, General Mike Flynn, who was the head of Defense Intelligence at that time, and also I managed to interview him before his short turn in the Trump White House, and he flew over and was meeting with the Egyptian generals in the run-up to the coup. And he has certainly emerged as a very outspoken critic of Morsi and of all political Islamists, and a real enthusiast for the coup. And when I asked him very pointedly what his advice to the Egyptian generals was, he was carefully evasive and told me it was too sensitive to discuss. But he also tried to convince me that he'd heard from the generals that the brothers were taking over everything, that they had their hands in the Interior Ministry, that they were on their way to setting up a kind of hardline Islamist regime, all of which is, of course, preposterous. The Interior Ministry was a pillar of the coup and actively moved against Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood.
Did Flynn? I just want to do a side note. Did he also try and argue that there was the Muslim Brotherhood had infiltrated the White House? Yeah. He was implying that the Muslim Brotherhood had people in the American government, that Obama was too close to the Brotherhood, that Obama's ambassador in Egypt was. I mean, it was almost like he'd been listening to kind of right-wing talk radio. Almost, or actually handing them the talking points. All right. Well, I don't want to get too sidetracked by this, but this is pretty nuts. Because this guy is now like he's the DIA, right? I mean, it's like he's
at that time he was the DIA. Yeah, I mean, DIA is not such a big deal in the U.S. government. I mean, that's not Secretary of Defense. But when he flies over to Egypt and is meeting with the generals there, he told me they really greeted him like a celebrity. And I think if you're in Egypt, then the head of military intelligence is 2 steps away from the president. I mean, Sisi was the head of military intelligence and got to know Flynn well and vice versa because they were opposite numbers. And a couple of job moves later, Sisi is running Egypt.
Now, I know Sisi came over, I think it was in 2006, and I don't know for how long, probably not that long, but, and took, I don't know, some type of learning annex class at the War College. But when a guy like Flynn goes over there and says, like, I'm with you, and you guys should be, I mean, it sounds like was cheerleading, right, for a coup. Do they?
Well,
I
mean, what he told me was he sat down with the head of Egyptian military intelligence, and they were scrawling out on a napkin over lunch their map of all the Islamist threats around the region. So certainly he conveyed a significant and probably acute fear of political Islamists.
Okay, so do they have a sense of like where this guy is in the administration? I mean, I guess maybe this is even just a broader question that I'm curious about. When these various officials come and all express their own varying opinions about this stuff, right? And almost make it seem like it's it's a statement of U.S. policy in some manner. Or at the very least, it's a statement of the policy of the various departments they come from. How is that interpreted? I mean, how do the military officials in Egypt, how do they interpret that? Like, do they have a sense of how our government works? I mean, I don't even feel like I have a sense of how our government works in that respect. Do they have a savvier understanding, or some do and some don't?
I would. Well, I'll tell you two things. First of all, if you visit Washington D.C., the Egyptian military actually has its own embassy. The Egyptian embassy is fairly far out, Connecticut Avenue. The Egyptian military has its own defense headquarters right near Georgetown, not too far from the White House. So they have a significant presence of their own and their own independent relationship with Washington. The other thing I'll tell you is, during this period, they would actually say to their contacts in the American Defense Department, we're getting a little frustrated here because we're hearing two different messages. You're telling us one thing, and the White House is telling us another. And they were openly expressing their frustration at that.
And they ended up going with what the Pentagon was saying.
Well, they went with what they went with their own assessment.
Right.
I'm not going to say this is like 1953 in Tehran, where the U.S. backed a military takeover. All we know is that there were mixed messages, and if you were expecting the American government to really put the brakes on a coup in Egypt, and I think, by the way, President Morsi was expecting that, you were wrong.
And was that a function of, from your perspective, of President Obama's indecision or ambivalence or inability to get everybody on the same page? I mean, presumably, I don't want to. Let's just stipulate that the United States, if there was a unified message coming from John Kerry, coming from Barack Obama, coming from the Pentagon, don't do this. We will not back you. We will call it a coup, and you will lose funding. And we should talk about that in a moment. Do you think that could have prevented it? And if it did, if we stipulate that's the case, what factor was the failure point? Was it Obama's ambivalence or inability to sort of discipline, to get everybody on the same discipline message?
All right, so we got a couple things there. First of all, I can't just nod along with your stipulation. If Secretary Kerry was here, or if Secretary of Defense Hagel was here, what they would say is, look, the truth is, if we did that, if we took away the funding, if we went against the coup, then the Egyptian military would have gotten money from the UAE and Saudi Arabia. In fact, those countries sent $12 billion pretty much the night of the coup. So the money was going to be forthcoming. And it wouldn't have made a difference. And I can't say it would have. So whether or not the U.S. could have stopped this is untested, frankly. On your other question, which is about President Obama's leadership sympathetic voices in the White House will say that differences like this are just a part of government, that it's impossible to really get everyone on the same page, that, poor Obama was trying to do the right thing, but he was up against an establishment that had certain prior suppositions and was hard to maneuver or steer, and he did the best he could. Others will say, as you hinted, that the problem is Obama's leadership, that he was too detached, too tentative, and unable to really enforce unity in his government. And I think those are questions that historians will wrestle with, and I hope I've contributed to that in a small way in my book.
In terms of just providing the details to make those assessments rather than sort of making those assessments yourself.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Arab Spring as one case study, I think you're off to a pretty good start.
Right. Okay, and so moving forward, the reaction to the coup was that it can't be a coup because I guess you've sort of almost provided that answer. The argument in the White House was if we call it a coup by U.S. Law, we cannot continue to fund Egypt. And if we do not continue to fund Egypt, the only implications of that will be that we lose our seat at the table.
Yeah, that's precisely right. So the U.S., it's worth reiterating, the U.S. gives Egypt $1.3 billion a year in military aid, more than any other country besides Israel. And that's been going on for decades, and it continues. So the morning after the coup, on July 4th, 2013, President Obama convenes an emergency meeting in the White House. And he actually opened that meeting by saying, well, obviously we can't call it a coup, because that would mean cutting off the military aid, and the relationship with Egypt is too important. The people around the table had come prepared to debate both sides of that question. And Phil Gordon, who was a White House advisor in Middle East policy, said, you know what, Mr. President, actually, we could call it a coup and cut off the aid, and we wouldn't have to call specifically for the restoration of Mohammed Morsi. We could just say, if you bring back democracy, everything will be fine. And that got his interest. And then they went around the table for a little while. And in that context, General Martin Dempsey, who was the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, surprised people. You expect the military to kind of stick with its counterparts in Egypt. And he said, aren't we risking our credibility if we don't call what is obviously a coup a coup? But at the end of the day, the overwhelming consensus, led by Kerry and Hagel and backed by, I think, many others in the administration, is that the relationship with Egypt was just too important, that if the U.S. Turned the other way, then the Egyptian military would get the support from the Gulf, that it had support from Israel, that it could get support from Russia or China or whoever else. And so we couldn't stop the coup, but we could lose a relationship. We might as well go along with it.
Okay, and let me ask the other question on the other side. I mean, it's clear that Obama was trying to, like you say, was trying to help Morsi and maybe needed more from Morsi to make that argument internally, and whether, we'll leave it as an open question as to what extent the U.S. could have influenced the Egyptian military. Could Morsi have done things differently? I mean, and like we say, it's not clear whether or not Sisi had this in mind from the get-go, but could Morsi have done things differently that would have made it more possible that those 800 to 1,000, those people in Rabah Square were a more diverse group of people? Like, I mean, was Morsi?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, sure.
Okay.
Oh, sure. I mean, if we wanted to start cataloging Morsi's failures as a leader, we'd be here all day. I mean, he was a lousy speaker. He wasn't an effective politician. He didn't do enough to bring together Egyptians. Now, that said, it wasn't that easy. A lot of the Egyptians were kind of out to get him, and a lot of the state apparatus was out to get him from the beginning. So he had real opponents, but certainly I can imagine he had real challenges. Certainly I can imagine a more deft and agile politician who could have done a better job pulling the country together. And then there's the question of those last days. Recently we saw a coup attempt in Turkey, and President Erdogan, whatever you may think about him, he cleverly got out of the way. He got on his airplane and he rallied the opposition from his iPhone, and he managed to turn back the coup. Morsi allowed the military to escort him into a military base ostensibly for his own protection. And, of course, his guards became his jailers. So nobody warned Morsi, and he didn't see it coming.
I mean, he doesn't come off as being a super bright guy.
Well, I think he was a fairly sophisticated professor of material science.
Okay.
You know, his background, he was educated in the U.S., he had a Ph.D. I think he, to call him stupid, I don't think is fair. Did he have experience as a politician requisite with the demands of that job? No.
Right. And was there the possibility of a different leader who could have emerged from the Muslim Brotherhood? Who, I mean, why Morsi, who doesn't seem to have the skill set that you would want for a politician? I mean, he may be smart, but as a politician, he doesn't seem to have the skill set. Was there no one within that organization who had a better skill set? Like, how did Morsi get to the point where he would be the guy without having what seemingly seems to be so little skills in that regard?
Well, it's interesting you should ask that. So the Brotherhood had two real stars. One of them broke away to start his own more liberal movement. Abdel Fattah was his name, and Abdelmonem Abdel Fattah. So Abdelmonem Abdel Fattah broke with the Brotherhood. He went to the left, and he tried to build a more pluralistic and moderate movement, and the Brotherhood disowned him. And one of the most interesting things I saw was that kind of Islamist on Islamist competition. The Brotherhood's other big star was a self-made businessman who had done a lot to really revitalize and organize the machine of the Brotherhood from the inside, Khaled al-Shatter. And he was their first choice for presidential candidate. And he certainly understood power and how to wield it. And the Presidential Election Commission disqualified him on a technicality. A court ruling, politicized court ruling under Mubarak, they said disqualified him from running for president. And so Morsi was actually the Brotherhood's understudy. So even the Brotherhood did not pick him as their first choice. And he was nicknamed inside the Brotherhood and outside as the spare tire. And that hounded him all the way through his presidency.
That is not... that it does not provide a lot of encouragement, I guess, in terms of where he ends up. So when you look at this, well, I should say, how does Sisi compare and contrast Sisi to Mubarak in terms of in terms of their rule? Because it appears that Sisi is now like, I mean, he initially came in and was supposedly committed to democracy. It sort of feels like that's not the case anymore.
Yeah, that's very much not the case anymore. He'll even say openly, he said in speeches, look, democracy, we're not ready for that. We're a long way from that. It's going to be a while, which is very different than the things he was saying when he first came to power. His rhetoric, 5 years on, is all about, look, it's me or chaos. I'm the only thing that's holding it together. My program, my platform, if you will, is just preserving the state, preserving the state, preserving the state. That's all he talks about. It's oddly enough, a lot of the liberals who were the most critical of Mubarak now look back on those last years under Mubarak as a kind of a golden age. Mubarak had allowed a certain degree of free speech. He had allowed a certain degree of limited political pluralism. And the economy was booming. He had listened to American advice, and he was opening up the market. And they had, by Egyptian standards, fairly robust growth and low unemployment. Under Sisi, Egypt has slidden backwards on all of those measures.
I want to ask you about that, because my understanding in the run up to the original protest against Mubarak was that there had been a considerable amount of protracted periods of time with a lot of labor strikes that were disparate around the country, and that they were somehow stitched together by the liberal pro-democracy forces, or that those labor unions saw that opportunity, and that part of the dissatisfaction, at least a part of the dissatisfaction with Mubarak, was a function of like Mubarak's son. I'm trying to recall now. Mubarak's son was involved in a lot of sort of like international banking stuff, and that there were sort of policies that were anti-labor that were drumming up things. Was that the case, or am I misremembering, or where?
No, you got a good memory there. I mean, it's so in terms of labor, the thing to keep in mind is that the authoritarian government in Egypt had never allowed independent labor unions. And there was no real tradition of vigorous independent labor organizing like there was in, say, Tunisia. So what there had been under Mubarak were wildcat strikes. So there was some unrest, but it wasn't the kind of organized movement that we see or are accustomed to here in the West. And you're right about his son. There were a lot of signs that President Mubarak was grooming his son to be his successor, which, by the way, was a trend around the region. A lot of the autocrats who'd ruled for decades were trying to pass power to their sons or people in their family. That includes Assad, who did it successfully, to Bashar al-Assad, his son. Gaddafi was doing it. There were signs that Ben Ali was doing it. So that seemed like a natural enough thing for him to do, and that was something a lot of people were quite concerned with. Let's not forget that the spark was Tunisia. One of the things that really struck me covering the Arab Spring revolutions is just the tenuous nature of political power. You know, you can be the strong man when everybody's afraid of you. And when they're suddenly not afraid of you, you're in real trouble. And so these regimes, when they go fast. And we saw that like a wave of dominoes all across the region.
And so, but there was no, I mean, so maybe to a certain extent, some of the economic policies might have like provided some kindling, I guess, in Egypt at that time. Where is Sisi in that regard? I mean, like relative. I mean, to put him on a scale of there may have been some moneyed folks who look back on Mubarak as a happy time. What about broadly speaking? What do people perceive in terms of his policies in that sort of sphere?
All the way down. I mean, the Egyptian pound was stronger, unemployment was lower, wage growth was higher. Everybody was doing better under Mubarak. It's not just the rich. You say what you will about liberal economic reforms, things were just better under Mubarak than they are under Sisi. And the economic portrait under Sisi is confusing. I mean, for sure, it's worse. Right? There was a period when Sisi was getting a lot of money from the Gulf. He was getting support from the Gulf to the tune of $2 billion a month to keep Egypt afloat. And during that time, he sent the IMF packing, right? Morsi had been in protracted negotiations, difficult negotiations about a package of economic changes that would include subsidy cuts, tax increases, trying to liberalize the economy. That's what the Americans were really pushing for. When Sisi took over, he said, hit the road, guys. We don't need to talk about this stuff anymore. I've got all this money from the Gulf. Let's keep going. A couple years on, even the Gulf grew impatient. Sisi had to very precipitously float the pound. The pound dropped by more than half, I think by two-thirds of its value, the Egyptian pound, which means most Egyptians lost most of their savings. And since then, he's really sent mixed signals. He's finally signed a deal with the IMF. It's 3 times as large as the one that Morsi was considering, meaning the economy is in triple the worst shape, right? The need is much greater. But at the same time as he's begun to make some gestures towards liberalizing the economy, like floating the currency, his government is also talking about renationalizing industries that the Mubarak government had just finished privatizing. They're talking about creating new state-owned steel and cement factories. So, and when he's speaking off the cuff, he talks about price controls and state management of the economy. I mean, he's all about major national projects. So whereas Mubarak in his last years was at least consistent in his steps to privatize, albeit perhaps in a corrupt way, the Sisi government is kind of back and forth on that, and still a much muddier picture.
Interesting. And so let's just turn I want to just briefly, because I know you're doing a lot of reporting about this in terms of Trump. But where is Trump? Where is the Trump administration relative to Sisi?
Well, they can't get enough of the guy. Trump thinks the world of Sisi.
I bet there's something that and why is that? Is it just he likes him personally? He likes that style, or there's a lot of smoke around the relationship with the Saudis and the Emirates and maybe the Israelis. It's Mueller's investigating into this. Like, what is your sense in your reporting that you get is the relationship there, and what's that about?
Yeah, it's interesting, in part because if you'll recall, when Trump was running for president, he was pretty anti-Muslim. I mean, his rhetoric about Muslims in general was fairly caustic. And Sisi, the president of Egypt, has often styled himself as a defender of Islam. And yet, when they met, they got along like great old friends. Trump called him a fantastic guy. You are right that Mueller is looking into the possibility that the Saudis and the Emiratis may have improperly tried to help the Trump campaign. That is still an ongoing investigation, and we don't know how that's going to turn out. One thing we can say is that President Trump, President Sisi, and some of those Gulf leaders in Saudi Arabia and the UAE have had a real meeting of the minds about political Islam. I mean, they all share a very hardline view towards political Islamists of any stripe, whether they won elections or not. And I suspect they generally share the view that the people of the region are not ready to govern themselves. And so they've really got along well on that front. And President Trump has applauded President Sisi for taking control, as he put it, in Egypt, and said that credited him with wiping out a terrorist problem. Of course, there's actually a much greater terrorist problem under Sisi than there was before him, but he has wiped out the Muslim Brotherhood, or tried to.
Forgive me, I'm a little cynical, and and you have much more firsthand, experience with this. But is there also maybe like another track in which they could all get along? Because I imagine if I'm a leader of the Emirates or Saudi Arabia, maybe to a certain extent Sisi, one of the other things that I enjoy is the ability to basically get whatever I want in terms of, or not necessarily whatever I want, but that it's not just a job where I'm there for policy purposes. Like, I get a lot of stuff when I'm there, right? Like it's, I'm the lead, it's not like, I get my salary and they give me a place to live for 4 years and that's it. It's no, I have access to the nation's wealth, and the nation's wealth and my wealth are not quite as distinct as they might be in other places, right?
Well, certainly, if you're talking about the King of Saudi Arabia, that's true. There's no difference between the family and the government whatsoever. I will say this, which you'll probably enjoy. If you talk to liberal Egyptian intellectuals these days, they're not a happy bunch because of the way things have gone in their country, but they look over and they see President Trump, and they see a president who brings his own family into the White House, who tries to fire prosecutors who seem to go after him, who shows a general contempt for the courts and the legislative process. And they think, gosh, this seems very Egyptian.
Well, yeah. But then there's the other element too, right? Which is he's also probably enriching himself in some fashion. So I guess what I'm saying is, do these guys get together? Is it your sense that they get together and the reason why they bond so well is that they're simpatico in terms of policy, or are they simpatico because they're all involved in some type of business deal?
Well, that's you talking, not me, in terms
Right.
of self-enrichment. That hasn't been proven yet, and I'm not going to talk about that. In terms of how they all get along, I only wish I was invited to hang out with them at summits together. But we can be fairly sure that there's a meeting of the minds, as I say, on the subjects of political Islam and of whether the people of the Arab world are ready to govern themselves. I mean, Sisi, the Gulf leaders, and President Trump all seem to be of one mind about the potential for democratic reform in the region, which is it's not going to happen anytime soon. And when it comes to the problem of violent extremism, they all seem to take the view that the answer is brute force. It's not about winning over hearts and minds. It's not about a more open and responsive government. It's not about economic progress. The answer is just brute force. And Islamists of all stripes, whether they want to win elections or they want to fly planes into tall office towers, ought to be treated with the same heavy hand.
All right. Well, then let me just ask you this way, because that's fair enough. I mean, I don't want you. Obviously, you can't speculate about stuff. But is it fair enough to say that, put Trump aside, if you were to put all those leaders in a room, they would not be averse to making business deals with each other?
Once again, I can't possibly take the bait on that one. I mean,
Okay.
I have no idea. But it's worth noting that as long as we're talking about President Trump, he's already got some business deals in the UAE. His name's on a couple of golf courses in Dubai, and that, whether or not that changes his thinking or it doesn't, who knows? But we can say for sure that it has created a perception in the region. That if you're another player in the region, say the government of Qatar, which has had a spat with the UAE,
right,
and you see Trump siding with the UAE, you have to think, goodness, if he had some golf courses in Doha, would we be better off right now? So just the fact that the government, that the president has these business entanglements creates, if not a real conflict of interest, a kind of appearance problem.
I bet. David Kirkpatrick, the book is Into the Hands of the Soldiers, Freedom and Chaos in Egypt and the Middle East. Thank you so much for your time today. We will put a link to your book at MajorityReportRadio.com. Thanks again.
Good talking to you.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. Those reporters, they always have their, like all the top reporters, all have, like, they really wall off certain areas. They will not go unless they've done reporting on it.
The reporter's code, I believe it's called.
The reporter's ethos.
Jamie, you know something about that, right?
I know nothing about that. I am not a real journalist. It's fine.
You don't have the reporter's ethos?
They showed me the oath, and I was like, not for me.
They didn't ask you to sign it in blood, was that the
Well,
problem?
that part would be cool.
Yeah.
But I will not pretend to be neutral.
Folks, well, I don't think he wasn't necessarily being neutral. It's just that he won't talk about something that he doesn't have.
Yeah.
I mean, he won't speculate.
Those are two different parts of the code.
Right.
I wasn't accusing him.
Oh, there's multiple codes.
Yeah.
It was weird how he kept dunking on Morsi, though.
What's it? I'm just kidding. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break and head into the fun half. Just a reminder, this program relies on its members for 96.3% of its revenue. Those numbers are a little bit old. It varies depending on what's going on at any given time. But somewhere around there, between 96.3 and 98% of its revenue comes from folks like you, members who support this program. You can do so by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. Jointhemajorityreport.com and sign up and support this program. And, I had an email. Yesterday we were talking about Chiapas, right? And in the context of just coffee, right? Was it
Alex Jones was selling coffee from Chiapas.
Okay.
Alex Jones sells
and we
Chiapas.
speculated as to whether or not he's a Zapatista now.
Yes. Now, I heard from my good friend Mike, who was formerly at Just Coffee. He's the one who started it all, the relationship with Marin and I. And he said, he wrote in, I just wanted to follow up on the conversation you had Friday, included comments about coffee from Chiapas, Mexico. Not all coffee from Chiapas is Zapatista growers. There's a lot of coffee produced in Chiapas. Last time I checked, a long time ago, there were 2 cooperatives in Zap communities that were qualified in the eyes of the government to export. I work for an importer that brings much of the coffee to the United States and wanted to refresh the institutional memory at the majority report that Just Coffee Cooperative, which he co-founded, was born from a visit to Zapatistas in the Highlands.
Oh, hell yeah.
And Just Coffee currently roasts coffee from the Yakil Yojabal Cholchan New Dawn grower in the... I'm sorry. Do you want to? Can you read this?
Oh, yeah. Yakabal Chochan.
New Dawn, a grower cooperative based in the Aventic region. They also roast coffee from the growers of Maya Vinic Cooperative. Maya Vinic is a subgroup of Las Abiejas, which is a pacifist group in support base of the Zapas in Chiapas. When I was last in Chiapas, there was a grower group whose name escapes me that was just forming to export coffee. I don't know if they're still doing so. So that is my way of saying, don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. You can also buy the majority blend. Try it out. And folks, today is Tuesday, which means that tonight is Tuesday night. Which means that tonight is the Michael Brooks Show, which you can watch live on our YouTube channel or via, you can listen to in retrospect on the same in iTunes. Who is on the program tonight, Michael?
So tonight, Trevor Beaulieu, or at Ricky Rawls. He's the host of Champagne Sharks.
Oh, I met him.
Yeah, good guy.
Yeah, nice guy.
He's going to be in. There's a lot of segments that we're going to get to, obviously. And we have a special substitute super producer in tonight. So I guess stay tuned to find out who is filling in for Matt this evening.
Yeah.
And then
Matt heard that the North Dakotans were contemplating there's going to be a referendum.
He's canvassing
legalizing recreational marijuana,
Matt
and he
looked at
immediately
me and he said, "Sometimes there's a greater purpose to one's own career. I gotta go home." So that's what's going on. And then I obviously the new illicit history on Patreon is on Jeremy Corbyn and anti-Semitism, which is very timely. So patreon.com/TMBS. And next Tuesday there is going to be a secret surprise. Year-long anniversary, because we've been doing this for a year, and I want to thank everybody. I want to start teasing this, though. Next Tuesday, surprise celebrity guest in studio.
Wow. Jamie, the Antifada?
Yeah, so our current episode that's up is still our delightful 2-hour-long episode with Matt Crispin and Virgil Texas of Chapo Trap House. So we talk about Blue Collar and Gung Ho as 2 movies about the dissolution of the American working class in the 70s and 80s. We also stitched together a bonus because we had so much good content from that recording sesh that we made a bonus for our patrons. And tomorrow we will be releasing our episode on Posadism, featuring Comrade Communicator of the Intergalactic Workers League. So check it out.
All right. And, Brendan. Yeah.
You guys know the story
what'd you have for lunch
of
yesterday?
Philippides?
Of who?
Philippides.
Philippides. No.
Well, look that up, and that's how my week's going to be.
He was the
going.
dolphin, right? Who would... no, okay.
Yeah, his wow. A
There you
Greek
go.
dolphin name joke.
Sam does know about Posadism.
There you go.
Check out Literary Hangover and pack a bowl and listen about Hawthorne.
Packable?
Pack a bowl and listen to a discussion of Hawthorne.
All right, folks, head into the fun app, 646-257-3920. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. And let's go to the phone.
That's
And
the
let's
phone.
go.
It's a new phone call.
Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 610 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Hello?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Am I on?
Yes? Who's this?
Hey. My name is Joe, and I live outside of Philly in Lansdowne, Pennsylvania.
Joe from Pennsylvania. What's on your mind, Joe?
Hey, I was just calling in because I wanted to talk about something. I'm a school teacher out here in Pennsylvania. I previously also taught in North Carolina, and thank goodness I got out because those teachers get paid almost nothing down there. And if you basically live anywhere that isn't rural North Carolina, it's almost impossible to afford living. But I wanted to call about, I know you guys don't have this in New York, but they might be coming soon, cyber charter schools. I don't know if you guys are familiar with them.
I've heard them a little bit. Tell me more.
Yeah, they basically steal. So they're only in 18 places right now: Arkansas, Arizona, California, Colorado, DC, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Michigan, Minnesota, New Mexico, Nevada, Ohio, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Texas, Utah, and Wisconsin. But basically what they do is they come in, they set up, and they just pull money from districts. So
now, are they,
as of last
when
year,
you say, okay, when you say cyber, so are they literally online? Like you don't go home?
Yep.
You don't
fully
go
online, 100%. You go nowhere. No brick and mortar. There's no place that you go. If you're a student in one of these schools, you wake up, sit at your computer, if you even sit at your computer to do it. If you even feel like logging on,
It's like
and that's your school.
It's homeschooling, sort of.
Yeah, and
except
are,
not.
are they providing a UBI for all the parents who no longer have childcare during the day and can't go to work?
Well, basically what they do is their performance, and this is what I really want to call out, is embarrassing. So the whole reason they exist, right, is because, public schools are failing, right? We're doing such a bad job, and parents and students need choice, right? That's the whole spiel, both from the Democrats and the Republicans. I did want to say I read that book, Live, Work, 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 Die, because I heard about it on your podcast. And I totally connected when they talked to the one union guy who put it pretty well. Democrats are like the mafia, right? You have to pay them to protect you from the Republicans who are out to kill you, but they don't do like a damn thing for you.
Right.
That's really like how I feel. It's like when they get empowered, they don't help us teachers out.
Well, I'll tell you.
all.
I think that's true. It's interesting. I had a conversation. I had a conversation with Randy Weingarten at the AFT.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah, in Pittsburgh, and she said to me that they felt the union. You know, it was in the context of, did you feel like you endorsed Clinton too early? And she told me that they felt that they had gotten into the Obama 2008 race too late, and they therefore had no influence with the Obama administration, and that thus you get like an Arnie Duncan and you know, that whole corporate reform pushing the charter thing through. Yeah, it's a real problem. I mean, and I think, you know, hopefully we're going to start seeing at least the teachers unions start to be a little bit less cooperative, or at least ask for more, for something for real. And I will say also, the only thing I can give you in terms of, not necessarily that's all I can say in terms of like good for the Democrats, is that the unions hopefully will push them a little bit more. But who knows? The next sort of positive thing I can say, just as, you know, in terms of like this school reform movement, is that there is becoming a greater understanding that that at least the mentality, the corporate mentality, school reform has also proven to be a failure. And we see Bill Gates has pulled their money out. So hopefully some of this will spread. Look, there was a very good Massachusetts pushback referendum on limiting the amount of charters, and I just think that like it just seems to me to be a scam. I mean, this one is
right.
Like
Well, this is here. Let me give you the info. So this is from a 2015 study by Stanford University, and this is what they found how poorly charter schools do. And last year alone, the largest online charter school pulled in $700 million in taxpayer money, and this is the results they're giving us. So they're reading. It's only based on reading and math scores because that's all they test for. If you went to an online charter, your reading score, it was like you missed 72 days of school. So it was like a student missing 72 days of the school year. That's how poorly they did.
Can I ask you a
math
question?
The math score was like missing 180 days of school, which is literally a full school year. So that's how badly they do. You can literally sit home and play Fortnite all day, and you would get as quality of an education.
Whoa. I got to stop you because my understanding is that my daughter, who's out of town at the moment, is watching the show, and I just want to say, Mila, don't listen to him about Fortnite. You can't get as good of an education, period, end of story, in any circumstance. That was not an endorsement of Fortnite. He was just making an example of something. So
how does it start in elementary school, or is this targeting primarily middle and high school students?
Yeah, I believe it third grade.
It starts.
I think
in
it's
third
the first one
grade.
that they did. At least in the study, I don't know what age group you can actually jump into online charter schools at.
Is that coming to New York? Are you sure that's coming to New York?
They're currently not in New York. I'm sure they're pushing it because you guys already have a big brick and mortar charter program going on in there. So, I mean, it's a moneymaker because you don't have to pay overhead.
Right.
It's just free money.
Right.
Because what happens, and this is, so I work in a poor district. I work in
You
another poor
create the
district
curriculum once, and that's it.
Yeah, exactly. And there's not much oversight like there is that we have at public schools, which is also patently unfair. And basically what they do is if we have 10 kids go to cyber charter school, however much per capita we would be getting for those 10 kids, we just have to write a check for that cyber charter school.
Right.
And another thing, since it is a business, it can close down. I think this just happened in New York. A brick and mortar charter just closed down, and now the school district has to absorb 500 more kids into the school that they weren't planning on.
Yep.
So that means they now need new teachers. They need, so this is just a huge problem. But I just want to get out there because I wanted to let hopefully the listeners know that I called my state representative and state senator, and they were actually really open to hearing about it. They even wanted the link to the study. So I would just say, if it's not in your state, please make sure it doesn't get to your state.
Send us the link to that study right now at majorityreporters@gmail.com, and we will put that study in our podcast notes.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Joe, appreciate the call.
This is
okay. Thanks so much, guys.
All right.
This is what teachers are striking about right now. Like, it's been going on for a while, but of course, the Trump administration is going to attack the basic right to a free public education. I mean, this is what they were talking about on that horrible panel at Ozzy Fest with Steven Pinker, some VC guy, and the CEO of VIP Kid. And they were speaking in reference to higher education when they said, the elite institutions like Harvard, the quality ones will continue on, and everyone else will probably find it a better deal to just do classes online. Like, of course that's not going to be limited to higher education. Like, why bring your kids anywhere at all anymore when you can just hook them into the fucking matrix? It's ridiculous.
All right, Mila's listening to the show right now. So we're not going to use that kind of language. Right, exactly.
Have you really restrained yourself from swearing in front of your kids?
Oh, sure.
Wow.
What?
That's impressive.
I don't swear in front of my child.
Fortnite has an impressive new technology where kids can't curse over the online
Is that right?
play either.
Is that really
that's not true. Oh, yeah. My location.
I totally believe
I
it.
learned to curse
Just,
from my
I was
parents.
also just notified by Kyle to remind folks the new Android app is in the store. It has got almost all the features it's going to, although there's going to be a little bit more. So check it out. go to majorityapp.com, follow the link to the Android app, and we're going to be updating the iOS app shortly. Check it out, ladies and gentlemen. Here is... Oh, let's play this clip. Do we know who made this?
Yes.
Okay, it was. This was made by...
Oh, is this the one of us?
This was Craig Adolphi.
Yeah, at Craig Adolphi on Twitter.
Made this and was very helpful in sending it along to Mike Cernovich. All right, let's go to the phones. Calling from a 919 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, how's it going? This is David from Raleigh.
David from Raleigh. What's on your mind?
So, I'm really notifying you of something that I saw yesterday that kind of concerned me. I noticed your stream was on a live stream chat. It's a live stream on YouTube.
All right, well, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Sam Pizzigatti on his new book, The Case for a Maximum Wage. Pizzigatti. Pizzagatti is really the way you... Sticking one's nose where it doesn't belong.
We can all see the humor in this.
Yes, that's pretty funny stuff.
And we're invincible.
And yes, you cannot touch us. Maybe you've heard of Mike Cernovich.
We are still laughing now, Mike.
Wow.
We are still laughing now, Mike.
Unintentional. We apologize to anyone who was offended.
I don't know if I believe that. I find that a little hard to believe. There you go.
I'm sorry, I didn't know that was still going.
And folks, we should tell you that, and I don't know if this is the reason why, but shortly after that was produced, this tweet from Mike Cernovich, and maybe we can put that up on the big board. We saw this this from Mike Cernovich. First, he's responding to I spot corruption. I know you were a frequent guest host on InfoWars. What happened? It seemed you distanced yourself somewhat. And then Cernovich said, was getting too famous. Hard to appreciate how big Alex's audience is till you get spotted everywhere. That life wasn't for me, says Cernovich. I suspect part of the reason might have been that when people saw Cernovich, they said, you're the guy who blew his audition on InfoWars. And he won't have you back on anymore. And then Mike said, no, I didn't want to go on because I didn't want to get famous.
I love that.
And I distanced myself from him, not he wouldn't let me on.
My whole business is alt-right, shilling conspiracy theories and nonsense. And the main vehicle for that on the internet, where I was a guest on, I wanted to stop going on because it would give me too much exposure to my prime market. Makes total sense.
Hey.
Makes total sense.
Good theory,
He's
Mike
keeping it
Cernovich.
real, man.
Keeping it real.
I also, like, Alex Jones might have been magnanimous. Like, go ahead. You could say that you didn't want to get famous, that this isn't about the fame for you. Just say whatever you want. You're never welcome on these premises again. That was some of the worst TV I've ever been involved with.
I've had bad hosts, and I wanted you to know this is completely impromptu. I've had bad hosts.
I've had people literally stare off into space.
I've had hosts who were so bad, it was good. You were worse. You were worse.
Dilate yourself out of my studio.
Time has not dilated enough.
Time was dilated.
For me to have. Let's go to a 608 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Joe. I'm calling from Illinois.
Hello, Joe.
I'm a libertarian.
Oh.
Hi. Yeah, I'm a libertarian. I just wanted to say I like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I like what they're saying. I think she's right on the, Palestine's being occupied. I wish we could get back to the Libertarian Progressive Alliance where we work together against the wars for monetary reform and to end the war on drugs.
What? I'm sorry. What's your name was Joe? Was it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, Joe, there's nothing. There's no not working on those things, right? Like, I mean, I think people are working on those things. The problem is that, from my perspective, is that when you see politicians who identify as a libertarian, right, as opposed to, let's say, one who identifies as a progressive, they don't tend to really actually show up when it matters, right? Like Rand Paul's been a bit of a disappointment, hasn't he, in that regard? I mean, maybe in terms of, he continues to advocate for legalization of marijuana, but broadly speaking, I mean, he makes a big show of it, but then when it's time to take a vote, he doesn't even vote that way.
Yeah, I mean, Rand Paul is good for voting against, surveillance measures and things like that and the war on drugs, but, he could be a lot better on preventing U.S. intervention in Syria and Ukraine, which I've kind of heard him use, making excuses for. I want to make sure that doesn't happen. I think there's plenty of, libertarians in the Democratic Party like Russ Feingold, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, to some extent, Bernie Sanders, Kucinich is out of the game.
Wait, you don't think they're libertarians? Yeah.
They're libertarian-leaning Democrats.
Right. Civil libertarian. Right. Yeah, no, I think that's true. What about like voting for Kavanaugh? Where do you think Rand Paul's going to fall on that? I mean, that is.
I think and hope he'll vote against him. Andrew Napolitano says that Kavanaugh helped Hillary get off for like the Vince Foster murders. I don't know a whole lot about that, but he seems pretty entrenched in both party establishments.
Wait. Whoa.
You were sounding so reasonable.
Joe, now wait a second. Are you? Is this a serious phone call?
Yeah, I called you a few years ago when I was more right-leaning libertarian, and I just want now that we have this fascist Republican enemies, we have people. The coalition against fascists was classical liberals, libertarians, communists, Democrats, socialists. Just bring it back together. Fight World War II. End it for real this time.
Okay.
Like enough bickering about economics.
Right. Wait, can we get back to the part about Kavanaugh getting Hillary Clinton off of the Vince Foster murder? Is that the what?
I honestly didn't check up on this, and I'm 31. I was 7 when this happened.
Right.
But allegedly, Vince Foster was I don't know. Somehow he's on the team.
No. Vince Foster was not allegedly anything. Okay. Any more than you are allegedly a unicorn. Okay? So, Vince Foster committed suicide. There was...
Excuse me, I'm talking about Kavanaugh.
You're talking about Kavanaugh, supposedly covered up for it. Yeah.
Again, I don't know much about that, but that's
right.
what Andrew Napolitano
I can tell. Yeah. Okay. Well, see, here's the problem. I mean, here's the problem with our alliance, Joe. That like my concern is, I have you on, and you call in. We're simpatico about legalizing marijuana. We're simpatico about war in many respects. Maybe criminal justice reform. Maybe one or two other things, surveillance state, etc. And then you say something that is, to my ears, completely bat crap crazy. And the problem is that like, they go, oh, well, I heard that from that guy, Joe, who Sam Seder is in an alliance with. And see, that's the problem. That's why these alliances, like, I'm happy for you to work on that stuff, but I can't be in an alliance with you if Judge Napolitano says something about Kavanaugh when he was working in the Ken Starr investigation, covering up for Hillary Clinton, murdering Vince Foster, then all of a sudden, like, I'm either endorsing that or I'm getting tarred with that, and I don't want to be associated with it. Now, the same thing happens with the economics, because your ideas about economics, I think, I don't know because we haven't had a chance to explore them yet, I think are a little bit wacky, to say the least. It's quite conceivable. I also think that your perspective on like property rights is pretty nuts too.
Well, can we ask why this caller is a libertarian? What basic core principles he's basing this belief on?
Well, I believe in voluntary exchange, perfect competition if possible, full markets, market integration, and
now let's say you can't
competition and cooperation.
Now let's say
That's not really like a human ethic or ideal, though, right?
Well, wait a second. So what is perfect? What happens if there isn't perfect competition?
Well, yeah, we have to make adjustments for that, but we have to make competition possible. I'm not saying competition should be exalted above other values, but I actually criticize other people in the Libertarian Party for saying the party should support capitalism instead of free markets, and some of us believe there's a difference. You might not. Chomsky has said good things about Adam Smith, so as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, it's possible to reconcile markets with socialism.
Chomsky is a libertarian socialist.
All right, wait a second. I don't care about the labels and stuff like that. So wait a second. So you want there to be competition without, but be a little more specific of what you're talking about in terms of these the distinction between capitalism and competition.
Well, I'm not really saying. I'm more trying to say it's a distinction between free markets and capitalism. We don't want. I criticize the rest of the party for being too pro private property rights and for saying that landlords can charge people inordinate amounts of rent that rightfully should be spent in the community, whether it's being spent at stores or whether it's being spent on the government for things that we're taxed for. There's no need for rentiers, landlords to collect rent, economic rent from people, and that's a principle you can find under capitalist and socialist ideas. But, if we have voluntary exchange and markets instead of just rampant, unhindered competition, then we can have fair markets and we can
hold on.
transition into a cooperative market system.
So wait a second. So and be more specific, like what you're talking about, as opposed to what it's not, because I'm a little bit confused. This you want to control people's ability to charge rent, essentially rent, and not specifically in terms of like, but you don't want people to have the ability to own more than they do, and then sort of more than they need, and then profit off of that. Is that what you're saying?
Essentially, and I think my vision of free markets is kind of compatible with socialism because, we would allow a lot of cooperative ownership instead of just focus on individuals trying to stockpile as much wealth that they can individually and use that to discriminate people and exclude them and deprive them. We want to have shared resources. We want to have it.
How would we enforce this?
Businesses.
How would we enforce this system under your?
Well, the thing is, under libertarianism, you can't enforce anything because force is wrong. You have to rely on peaceful, convincing rhetoric to convince people that what you want is better than what they so far support.
So there would be no laws in support of what you're talking. Now, see, here's the thing, Joe, is that like, here's why I get so frustrated talking to libertarians, even when some of their ideas sound appealing to me, because that is fantastical. We're going to have, if you want to set something like that up, if you want that to happen, it's not going to happen by you going around and convincing all these people and hoping that they continue to do it, because immediately what will happen in that situation without the proper statutory regulatory structure is that somebody will come in and take advantage of that system.
Yeah, it's true. They could use their free speech to shout me down and use hate speech. But
no, not hate speech. They'll just come in and the whole system where it's like where you aren't charging rent, people are going to charge rent. People are going to amass more. I'm not saying all of them are going to do it, but there's we're basically living in that situation now. We see what happens when you deregulate a little bit. You're talking about total deregulation. And
not everyone's starting from zero either.
Well, of course. I mean, people are going to enter into that situation with a lot more money, and guess what they're going to do with it? They're going to use that money to amass even more money because there's going to be a competitive advantage.
I'm going to have to ask Judge Kavanaugh if he killed Vince Foster as part of a lesbian phone sex ring with Hillary Clinton. That's something I'm super concerned about.
But I mean,
I
Joe,
met with him, and he
that-
said that he didn't do it. So it's cool. I'll vote for him. I like that, nutcase Rand Paul.
Right.
Just I'm going to need to know if Trump was involved with the detonation of Building 7 by the CIA. Oh, he said he wasn't, so I support him.
You see the problem there, right, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, if I'm going to say crazy things, you can't be in an alliance with me. But if you can't look past the crazy thing I say every once in a while and focus on what we agree on, then I can't be in alliance with you.
Well, no, wait a second. No, Joe, I'm not. All right, that's fine. We can't be in an alliance with each other. But I'm just talking about your idea for setting up this, I guess, society where everybody volunteers, where you get 300 million people on the same page, and they all agree to function in the same way without any type of regulatory or statutory guidelines or enforcement. I mean, you're not talking about politics. Honestly, you're just...
Yeah, I'm talking about a radical change in society that has to happen independent of politics, the kind Emma Goldman would have wanted. You can have private arbitration, private dispute resolution. It doesn't have to be for profit, but it can be outside of the state. Sharia law, for example, people resolve their disputes outside of the state all the time. Crazy conservatives call it Sharia law infesting the United States. These people are just going to private, non-state affiliated, non-binding.
Joe, there is force in the context of Sharia law.
There's force in the context of American law, and you just admitted that you can't, enforce a law against rent without using force against it.
Right.
So if you want to prove me wrong and implement socialism through force, go ahead. I'm going to try to do it voluntarily by convincing people, and I think you are going to as well because you have a radio show, and that's what you do.
Well, yes, I understand, but I'm also saying that one of the things that we're going to have to do if we're going to have, more socialistic policies or any policies, for whatever they are, they're going to have to be codified in law, and they're going to have to be a function of statute and regulation, and then they're going to have to be enforced by the state.
Or communities, decentralized network of participatory democracies.
I agree with that.
May I just add? May I just say two quick things to the gentleman? I guess number one, as far as working together on things, we can. Maybe we'll end up being at the same protest about abuse of immigrants, as an example. Maybe you'll even vote in the same way to get Trump out of office, so that's fine. But we are obviously not going to be on.
I voted for Bernie in the
primary. So there you go. So we already were working together. We're obviously not on the same page. And in terms of a lot of the substance, and I think, unfortunately, I don't know if Sam would say this, so I don't want to put words in his mouth. But I think for me, one of the reasons I can't be in a full alliance with libertarians is because I think, and obviously not intentionally, that the economic in your case, but the economic policies that you guys advocate are part of the road to the fascist threat that we're in right now. The deregulation, the allowing of sort of uninhibited corporate power. And I don't think it's a surprise that a lot of libertarians did in fact support Trump. And I don't, so there's a substantive concern here other than people just not being able to put aside. I'm willing to put aside all sorts of relatively small differences to get things done, but we've got some pretty big fundamentals, at least in the road to your utopia. Your utopia sounds nice, but it's a utopia, and what you might advocate economically to get there would make things far worse, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I have criticized libertarians for the thing that you just criticized, which is they advocate too much corporate power. They don't recognize often enough that corporations are actually creations of the state. The Secretary of State's office creates those things, LLC statuses, confers financial and legal immunity for them. That's not free market, in my opinion. I don't know about the rest of the LP, but I hope.
But here's the thing: is that there's, and I don't want to. I feel like I'm telling you there's no Santa Claus. There is no free market. It doesn't exist. It can't exist. It can't.
Look up the first 3 fundamental theorems of welfare economics and tell me that again. Look up co-opetition, computers.
Send me a link.
And cooperatives working together.
Listen, you can tell me about theories, okay? But I'm telling you, it can't exist. There's no, it can't.
That's what they said. That's what they said about a world without slavery, a world without war, a world without peace. So give up if you want.
Well, first of all, I got news for you. We have a world with slavery. We have a world with war. And
right.
I don't know if we can have a world without those things. I hope we can. I certainly want to work towards them. And like Michael said, every step we take towards that goal is a net positive. Every step that we take towards the goal that you're talking about, not only is it impossible for us to get there, is a net negative in my mind. Every bit of deregulation that we would have to impose to get there is going to be problematic. Every bit.
I hope you like,
there's some bad
I hope you like the level of regulation you're getting under President Trump, because that's what you're going to get every 4 to 8 years until you change the system and actually protect individual rights from whoever the majority is.
I think the argument is that we
is.
would make broader statutory things, and he won't have the opportunity to change it as much.
Can I talk to this caller for a second, because I feel like I have the closest politics to him of any of us, right? I'm not full on libertarian socialist. I'm a non-dogmatic Marxist, but I do lean that way because I have seen how badly things can go when socialism leans towards bureaucracy and authoritarianism. It's been tried many times and always went horribly awry. So I keep hearing you cite Chomsky and Emma Goldman, and it's not just a label thing, like whatever you want to call it. Those people did not and do not want to let poor people starve in the streets, right? And you keep talking about voluntary associations, but whatever you want to call them, leftists, left libertarians, anarchists, whatever, we recognize, and socialists, all kinds of socialists as well, we recognize that there are more entities than the government that are making people unfree, right? So when you say it's about voluntary associations, if your choice is between working for a company at the wage that they're offering and starving to death, what kind of a choice is that?
You're absolutely right. That's not enough choices. And I tell other libertarians that there's private discrimination that still happens all the time. And if government doesn't actively enable it now, it used to enable it, enabled it recently. And those actions, the result of that continues on to today. And a lot of them don't admit to that. One of the first things I realized the libertarians could be wrong on is, affirmative action. And yeah, we don't want people to starve in the streets. I try to tell people in the Libertarian Party, it's not just cops and military that should be, that's the bare minimum function of a society. You have to have, at least food stamps or something. But if we don't, there are alternatives to this though, like food not bombs, mutual aid. There's ways for people to feed each other without the government. But that said, I wouldn't have food stamps be the first thing I would abolish if I were trying to just dismantle the government one piece by one. Rand Paul said he wouldn't cut a dime from the social safety net until he first got rid of the entire corporate welfare safety net. So
and he lied.
It sounds like there are. It sounds like you are leaning more to the left than we initially thought when you said you were a libertarian, and I would encourage you to read more Chomsky and more Emma Goldman, and I would love to pull you further in this direction, because there is a huge difference between building a free society built on respect for humanity and the brotherhood of all human beings and true freedom, and the sort of free market hell world that right libertarians would create if they were in charge.
Joe, call back in a couple more years, and I think we'll be a little bit closer.
But I would love to hear from you again, like seriously. And
thank you.
I wish you well on your political journey.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks
for the call.
He has assured me that there was not a sex colony with children on Mars, and I'll be voting to confirm.
Calling from a 702 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. It's Bro Flamingo from Las Vegas.
What's happening?
Hey, Sam. First I just want to comment on your last caller. I was waiting for you just to go in on him, and taking the task, but it just took longer than expected. He just seemed kind of confused, but good conversation anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But yeah, right. But the second thing I want to talk about, in terms of the Democrats, right? And let me put an asterisk before I say what I want to say. Is the party's changing with Ocasio-Cortez and the woman from the Detroit district that she got elected, the Muslim woman. I forgot her name. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And it gives me hope because they're saying some of the right things about Nancy Pelosi and Democrats, but as a black person, and I realize you have to vote defensively, and sometimes less evil is better. But I'm just afraid. I'm tired of the lip service that I get from centrist Dems, and you guys have taken them to task about a lot of it, But I'm just afraid, for example, people like Biden, Hillary, they're gonna pull out the retreads, in 2020, and that's not the way to go. And frankly, the soft racism of the Clintonites and and the enablers like Pelosi, even Schumer. But Schumer's I have to give Pelosi credit. At least parliamentary, she's pretty good. But Schumer's just a Wall Street stooge. But what do you say? Basically, what I'm trying to say is, as a black person, what would motivate me, I guess, to vote for Democrat if it's somebody like some centrist idiot, like Biden, or who knows? You know what I'm saying? Who knows what to put out there? Maybe you might put Tim Kaine out there or something. I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's what would motivate you? I mean, assuming that we have similar policy outcome, similar desires for policy outcomes, you just simply have a better shot at getting closer to those policies than you would with the Republican that will be running against them. I mean that's basically it. And then I would say also the Supreme Court.
True, fair enough.
I mean if you had, let me put it this way, if you had a Democratic president, a Democratic House, and a Democratic Senate, I don't care who the president is. I don't care if it's Tim Kaine, right? I don't even care. I mean, I don't want to say Joe Lieberman, but he's not a Democrat. But you're gonna get a restored Voting Rights Act. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind about that. There's no doubt in my mind about that.
Sam, I get that. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I just want to say one thing. The Voting Rights Act, I agree. You know what I'm saying? That should be restored. But it's important. But there's also in the back of my mind, it's saying, okay, we restore the Voting Rights Act, right? Voting Rights Act. And the Democrats. Voting Rights Act. But again, I just feel like black people will get lip service, and we've been the base of the party for a while. Like for example,
well, right. Except for if you restore the Voting Rights Act, you'll literally re-enfranchise hundreds of thousands of black people.
Right. But Sam, I just want to say this. I am on board with that. But here's what I'm saying: we re-enfranchise the black vote, but essentially what I'm saying is, okay, we re-enfranchise the black vote, which is good, but will we still keep getting lip service? Because I feel like somebody let's say
we will all just get lip service, and probably black people will get even more lip service, without a doubt. But they'll also have marginally more electoral power to make sure to get someone who's not giving lip service in the next vote, right? I mean, this is, I mean, without a doubt, we're talking about incremental benefits, but and obviously, there's got to be a lot of work that happens that has nothing to do with elections to make any of this, to make any type of real, more than incremental changes. But that wasn't the question. The question was why would I vote for a Democrat? That's why. Because you can get to the polling place and you can pull the lever, and you can do all that within, maybe 2 hours, right? Like in the time it takes you to pick up your dry cleaning, plus, or by the time it takes you to, I don't know, go get a hamburger, or you can do it, and that's why. And I can point to
right. And last thing.
Go ahead.
Last thing, Sam, and I'll jump. I just want to say last thing. Also, again, because I remember I said it's giving me hope seeing Ocasio-Cortez,
right,
and I get basically the Muslim woman in Detroit. But I also want to say it's some of this lip service, and like we said, true lip service to everybody, but also talking specifically about black people. But do you think it's also a function of the Clinton operators and the Clintonites still running the party in the stranglehold on it?
No, I think it's something far more systemic than that. I mean, I think that's the nature of the people who run this country, and that's where the power lies. Sure. And that's and so the idea is long-term project, change that.
Sure. All right, thanks, Sam. Thanks for the call. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you calling.
I think there's a whole slew of things that have been put on the table that were really hard-won victories and are not sufficient for any number of things we need to achieve, but I think particularly in light of how savagely under attack they are, it should be reminding all of us of how elemental things like voting rights are.
Right.
Yeah, and voting takes 2 seconds,
right,
and does not preclude doing lots and lots of other things. And it's no coincidence that there is a long history of black radicalism in this country. Capitalism and white supremacy are inextricably linked, and if socialists want to win, they have to deal with white supremacy. Like, you can't fight one without fighting the other.
Let's look at this clip of Tim Scott. And I don't know why Tim Scott is put in this position in some respects, right? But here's an example why you might want to vote for a Democrat, or I guess Tim Scott. And here is Tim Scott on Face the Nation. He is the Republican senator from South Carolina. And again, I don't know why he is necessarily put in this position, but I guess it's,
you're being facetious. It's pretty obvious why, right?
Well, it's obvious why, but I mean, and maybe to a certain extent, he should have to sort of justify, I could say, Michael, you hang around with a lot of people who just constantly mock you for being homeschooled. Why do you keep hanging around with them? That.
That is even. I'm trying to think.
That's
of what
not
it
even,
would be like. No, look. Let's really push it. If there was a black member of the apartheid South African government.
We don't need that metaphor as the same as this.
Yeah, okay.
Let's just play.
Let's
Here
just
is
do the same.
Tim Scott with Margaret Brennan, and talking about making a bill that would make, this is pretty progressive, making lynching a federal hate crime.
Recently signed on to a bill to make lynching a federal hate crime. It's something Congress has tried to do over the past 100 years 200 times and failed. Why are you the only Republican signing on to this?
Well, I think I'm the first Republican. By the time we get this out of the Senate, there will be several Republicans, and there are some Democrats as well.
There are 26 co-sponsors, including yourself. They're all Democrats. You're the only Republican.
Well, sometimes it's good to be first. So I look forward to looking for ways to bring more folks on board. I think we will. The fact of the matter is that the lynching issue is an issue that we should have dealt with many years ago. It is still an issue that raises fear and trepidation in communities of color. And frankly, in any community in this nation, we should all stand together and say that lynching is a hate crime, be done with it, move on. I think we'll see a bipartisan coalition coming together on that bill.
Do you feel alone in your party on some of these issues of racial justice?
I don't. I honestly think that a lot of Republicans are leaning forward. The fact of the matter is that the meeting at the White House was set up by the Judiciary Committee, Senator Grassley, to meet with the president to talk about specifically how the criminal justice system can be improved for those folks who are the most vulnerable in the system. That was led by Senator Grassley, whom others have said about Senator Grassley. He would never allow a criminal justice piece of legislation to leave the judiciary. And here we sit on the cusp of seeing that happen. So Lindsey Graham has led on the issues of young African-American males being disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system. Michael Lee has worked on fairness in the criminal justice system. Ted Cruz is working on that as well. So there are a number of us who are working on the issue. The fact that I'm the leading co-sponsor on the lynching legislation is true, but it does not necessarily tell the whole story on other Republicans who are engaged in the process of making sure that we have a level playing field in the criminal justice space.
So you're going to deliver their votes on your lynching bill?
Well, I'm not going to ever say that I'm going to deliver anything that I cannot guarantee that I'm going to deliver. I am confident that I will have more than just myself as a Republican on the bill. This show will actually bring more Republicans on board by the time we're finished than I did before we started. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, I love how he said
maybe two. Maybe there'll be 2 or 3 on board. Yeah, they're leaning in.
They're forward leaning. They're supporting. They're opposed to like antebellum torture murder porn. That type of forward-leading leadership for the 21st century in the Republican Party. Oh, and by the way, they're forward-leading in a way that they aren't actually on record sponsoring legislation against the antebellum public murder torture.
I showed them some pictures of some black people who were lynched, and I will tell you, they did not smile.
No.
Well,
no.
They did not laugh. They did not laugh. Let's just leave it at that.
Tough
and
stuff.
so I'm not going to guarantee anything. But
lynching, tough stuff.
Tough stuff.
Tough stuff.
When
Really
this bill
tough.
was presented earlier this summer, someone asked Mitch McConnell what he thought about it, and he said, I thought we did that many years ago. I hadn't thought about it. I thought it was done back during LBJ or some period like that.
I thought it was done back. I mean, look, maybe we should, but I've got.
Since I thought we did it, let's just say we did.
Yeah.
And just leave it at that. Let's not. We don't need to go over this. Why we open this can of worms?
We got some pesticides to put in some poor kids' food. We got
A lot
other
of
things to do.
controversy. A lot of controversy around that, folks.
It's almost like Republicans have never prioritized this issue.
That is an amazing shift, though. Like, I feel like, and you would know this better, like, under Bush or something, that would be exactly the type of thing that they would love to like, it would be ludicrous. They'd be like, oh, yeah, we're on the cutting edge of the anti-lynching agenda. See, we're not racist. And under Trump, they're just like, I mean, the black guy's pushing the friggin' lynching thing again. I understand why he has to pretend
we understand
to
why
do
Tim
it.
Or Clinton, for that matter. Like, oh, mass incarceration, fine. Lynching, a bridge too far.
Let's go to. Here's Lou Dobbs. Do we have this?
Here's Lou Dobbs freaking out about the anti-lynching legislation.
Yeah, Lou Dobbs. So we have a situation where we only have one Republican who will sign on to a federal statute saying that lynching would be a federal hate crime. And meanwhile, Lou Dobbs is talking about unite the right, rally goers, as if they're just there, like they're guys who like to hang out with each other.
Defense bill giving the military one of the biggest spending boosts in American history. Our top story tonight, the radical left militant group Antifa wreaking havoc over the weekend in Virginia and our nation's capital. In Charlottesville, Virginia, 40 white nationalists showed up for the Unite the Right 2 rally, but were largely outnumbered by Antifa thugs, some of whom had run-ins with police, physically attacked the media. A station from Raleigh, North Carolina had an audio cord sliced by the mob, and an NBC crew had their cameras smacked around by an angry Antifa thug, or activist, if you prefer. In Washington, D.C., where the Antifa mob numbered around 200, they heavily outnumbered the 24 so-called white supremacists they were supposedly there to confront. They took their thuggery to, again, a new level, threatening to kill the president.
if it came down to it and it was a group effort, we'd have to do him like Gaddafi.
Like Gaddafi?
Yeah.
That was dope.
Hell yeah.
That was a great soundbite.
I like the idea, though, the so-called white supremacists. Like, you can't even say what they were.
No, you
They're
can't
like-
even.
Holding up signs with Nazi symbols and slogans on them, and like using the 14
So-called
words or
Nazi
So-called.
symbols and slogans, so-called signs.
I also like how he said WNBC. He's a really old school broadcaster there.
The idea that they would cut a cord, the mob got out there and they're like, let's get that guy. Okay, come on over here. Bring me the scissors. All right, now let's keep going. Pillage.
Yeah, it's
The
very
mob cut the car.
situational where these people seem to care about the free press, right?
You know, if there had been 200 white supremacists and like 3 Antifa, the story would be like, clearly, people support the white supremacists and the Antifa. I mean, the way they characterize it is sort of fascinating.
Well, that's just their classic. Like, they had a big loss, not only Antifa, but also just like a lot of people in D.C. stepped forward. In fact, the whole thing essentially turned into like an anti-Trump, anti-racism rally, which is great. And they had a major loss, and it was embarrassing. So what do when they can't try to bully and terrorize other people? They claim victimhood. That's what you always talk about with the right. They love to be victims. So that's everything that's emanated out of this weekend has been, we're the victims.
Folks, let's go to this. You should see this. Seb Gorka, whom we haven't heard from in a bit. It seems like he's lost his sheen a little bit. Maybe people are just bored with him. But how do you get your mojo going, ladies and gentlemen, if you are a guy who's no longer really has the allure that you used to have? Oh, now he's a well, I'll tell you. Here's what I would do. I would let's say I was a contributor on MSNBC, right? Or let's just say I was a frequent guest. What could I do to make it seem like to those around me that maybe I had a job? Well, I know. I would print up business cards. And why wouldn't I drop the MSNBC logo on there? Well, if you're Seb Gorka, PhD, and you want to make it look like you have work, why not put the Fox logo on your card? So here we have an example of Seb Gorka's business card, Fox News in the corner, and he has a Gmail address, which is weird.
Can we speculate?
Fox News at Gmail.
Exactly.
Fox News.
His email address?
Fox News Security.
He
at
says he's a
hotmail.com.
national security strategist. And I really wondered, for whom did he ever develop any strategy regarding national security?
That is also the best. Like, I guess if we sort of, I guess you could suggest that like maybe there's a handful of people in like the military or intelligence bureaucracy where that title might actually fit. But that is one of the most awesome like Will Ferrell movie made up job titles I've ever heard. Like total Will. Like, what are you doing, Will? Like he's just like, I'm a national strategist.
I'm a
worldwide strategist, man.
I am a domestic policy strategist.
Right. I'm a domestic policy strategist for MSNBC.
Now, here is what a real Fox News channel business card looks like. He didn't even get the right logo. That's what's he got the wrong logo that he used. The Fox News channel card has down at the bottom a 21st Century Fox Company, and then a different address, of course, and actually has a foxnews.com email address. This has got to be embarrassing for Seb Gorka, and I feel bad calling him out on it.
Wow, hey.
I don't.
The man's got moxie, man. I feel bad if I put a publication.
Not just moxie, but design skills.
I mean, all of the above. Like, I feel bad if I leave a publication in my Twitter bio that I haven't written for in a few months. So, like, We should all be so confident.
I lied on my immigration forms, and you're worried about bylines. Oh, silly Jews.
I wonder if he did this himself too, like on if he did like a
Yeah, definitely.
You think he did
he
it
was
on
listening to a podcast and heard about a Vistaprint deal that.
Oh, I mean, like on his
Vistaprint.
inkjet, like like when the inkjet,
Oh.
the printers came out. That's what the big thing is. You could print your own business cards.
National security strategist, Viceroy of the Budapest Vichy Wren.
I'm going exactly. Unbelievable. I wonder if he did get those at. I wonder if I could get a Fox News. I wonder if you get Vistaprint to like actually use a logo that is not, that is
Chief
clearly-
helmsman of Make America Great Again. Chief BDE
Damn it! I guess I'm gonna have
of
to get a new business card.
all big dick energy all the time. Who can't fit? Just like working out the copy.
Oh my god! Should have put a logo on there. Knew it.
Dad's favorite boy.
Um,
Your Polish neo-Nazi.
What else we got here? Oh yeah, this is really sad. Jason Kessler, who was the organizer of the Unite the Right rally, is extremely upset that he's not going to be able to hold his pole as he marches. Here he is complaining that Antifa wouldn't let the white nationalists walk with their flagpoles.
What National Park Service told us. I was told by the transit National Park Service that we could bring flags as long as we took the flags off.
He was told by somebody he could bring poles downtown. I'm addressing that issue right now.
But they're saying what transit told us was as long as we took the flags off the poles, we could take it on that station. That's what they told us.
But they're not off the poles.
But we can slide them off.
You can't take the poles downtown.
They're saying we can't take the poles downtown.
Okay.
What?
Captain Hamilton.
Take the flags off. We're going to need somebody. Can we give them to somebody to bring them to us an alternate way?
No,
why are they waiting till now?
Momentarily, because our advisors, they can't take poles downtown. They got about 5 foot long wooden pole, Jeff, that's connected to
you guys can't make an exception for us? I mean, it seems like I should have been told before.
So my organization here, I basically just live stream activism, mostly in DC. So this is kind of my home turf. But I was at Unite the Right last week.
So basically, it's not just Antifa, obviously, that was keeping them from bringing their polls. It was the city of Washington, D.C., which said, like, hey, we may not want you white nationalists to carry 5 foot long spears down to. In fact, do you know that there's that famous photograph of the of a white supremacist using a flagpole to, I think it was in the busing. I think it might have been the Boston busing riots. There's a famous picture of a flagpole being used or about to being used to impale someone. And these guys just found out that they're not going to be able to bring their weapons / flags with them downtown, and they're rather upset.
The only thing missing in that clip would have been if that cop just started beating him with a billy club.
Here's another example of that, but that is a more recent one.
I
The other
mean,
one's pretty dramatic.
But again, that's what they do. They set out to terrorize, sow violence and division, and then when they don't get their way or they had to take an L, then they whine and claim to be victims.
Freedom of speech.
Let's see what else we have here in terms of sound.
So
What else is good
disgusting.
here, Brendan? Should we?
I would say the Brendan pick of the week would be the pyramid one, but it came to us from Jamie.
What is the pyramid one? I don't have it on my
It's
list.
the last one, I believe.
Oh, I can't see it. I don't have it. Oh.
10.
The birthism. Oh, that one. Oh, okay. The pyramid. All right. Yeah, this is a clip from ABC's. Is it called the pyramid?
I believe so. Wasn't that the name of the show where there's like the pyramid and you have to like guess what the Someone's gonna get mad at me. For not
Quiz
knowing this.
pyramid.
Okay, well, whatever it is, the pyramid. And here it is. Michael Strahan, Tim Meadows are on the show. Wow, I haven't seen Tim Meadows in a long time. And here it is. Birthism, just a normal thing in the culture now. Here we go.
Evan and Tim for $50,000. Here's your first subject. Go.
Bin Laden.
Evan and
Oh
Tim.
my God. There it is. The question is people whose last name is Obama.
Yeah. Bin Laden Obama. Famous
That's nuts.
Bin Laden Obama.
famous activist.
It's gonna be people dropping QAnon things in like pop culture in less than a year at this point.
Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 301 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Vito from Frederick, Maryland.
Hello, Vito. What's going on?
Hey, so I just started kind of catching your show there maybe a couple months ago, and I decided to go ahead and become a member. I really like it.
Oh, well, thank you, Vito. Let me give you one of these.
You're welcome. So, you had this guest on a little while back, and she was talking about sort of like political identity. I'm trying to remember her name. I think it might have been Mason. Last name? I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Who's it?
Liliana Mason.
Liliana Mason, yeah.
Right. And I thought that her, her analysis was like really spot on. But what I'm wondering is sort of what your take on what she had to say about sort of, the dissolution of the class distinctions politically, as far as, in other words, sort of the uber Republican of the white Christian male rural Republican, and how they're sort of willing to forego all of their economic interests. A lot of the progressive policies that they could benefit from, and they're sort of willing to sort of forego that for these.
Well, if I remember correctly, what she said is that specifically that the polling showed that people identify with their class far less in the 2016 election than in past elections, and the only thing I can tell you is that I think there's been a long-term project on the right, I believe, to make people think the government is not effective. And if you do not believe that government is effective, and certainly Trump sort of brought up government in a sort of like to do a sort of a sideways agenda, then you may not sort of buy into the idea that government can actually help you. And if you don't in that instance, then, from your perspective, you're not voting against your best interest, because government is only a reflection of like what I want in terms of cultural priorities. That could be one reason. I don't know why else there would be a difference in that phenomena, like in the most recent election as opposed to other ones. I mean, look, people vote against their economic interests all the time, though, right? I mean, I would vote for higher taxes. The values that I have are that it's going to be a better society, and
right.
So that in and of itself is not necessarily the market, but they also just might not think that government can be effective in addressing these things.
Can I just add something real quick? And I'm sorry, is there a delay? I'm not sure how well the callers can hear me, but there was the stuff that Stan Greenberg did in the 80s, the guy who was Bill Clinton's pollster, and he looked at the Reagan Democrats, and I think at Macomb County, like that famous county in Michigan. And essentially what he demonstrated, which I think has some overlap and kind of intersects through what she said, and I think still plays today, is basically that a lot of these voters were quite racist. That was one. They were also anti-corporate and receptive to a populist economic message, but they didn't believe that Democrats would actually deliver on it, so they thought, either way we're screwed, but Republicans will do my racism.
Right.
Well,
and that's not an irrational belief, depressingly, right? Like, it's disgusting, but it's not irrational.
You can always count on them to hate the blacks.
Well, there you go.
So,
No, seriously, yeah.
And it was a huge part of the dissolution of organized labor in the 70s and 80s. I mean, it was a bit of a feedback effect, right? Because on the one hand, the Democrats were abandoning organized labor. On the other hand, organized labor, a lot of people were too racist and sexist to recognize their natural allies in the working class.
Appreciate the call, Vito.
But also, can I just add the caveat that most of the people who voted for Trump are the same people who vote Republican all the time.
Right.
And most poor white people did not vote for Trump because most poor people don't vote at all.
I think the polling that she looked at was not necessarily even tied to vote. It was more like how people identified.
Yeah. I mean, I found it fairly alarming, the degree to which class has been dissociated from politics in our country. And I think that's maybe starting to change a little bit, but it just goes to show you how little class consciousness we have as Americans. And Democrats do bear a little bit of the blame for this, because when the two political parties represent the right and left wings of neoliberalism, it becomes like, okay, are you going to vote for diversity capitalism or this clearly worse fucking neoliberal hell world? And it's just, it's bad.
Really good piece in Vox that came out over the weekend about Chris Kobach as a perfect example of how of the type of person that we should be thinking of as representing white supremacy. He's a Harvard-educated lawyer. He studied under Samuel Huntington. He's upper middle class, and it was a good corrective. I forgot who wrote it. That actually the primary messengers of white supremacist politics and that in American life today are definitely suburban affluence, more so than poor, contrary to that stereotype.
Calling from a 508 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is well, let me switch to. All right. Hey, this is Jack from Massachusetts.
Jack from Massachusetts. What's on your mind?
So I saw this article written by CBS yesterday that's basically saying that AOC is the left equivalent of Sarah Palin, and the entire kind of backlash against her is just absolutely ridiculous to me at this point. Like, the only real thing that I saw that they actually fucked up on was when she claimed unemployment was low because people were working two jobs. Like, other than that, like, people are just taking her little maybe she doesn't answer a question super well, but
I mean, I can tell you this, Jack. The comparison is so ludicrous that it's almost sexist. I mean, the only thing, it is sexist. I mean,
it is objectively sexist.
The only thing that is similar between those two is that they are both women.
It's sexist, and they're scared. I would say they're scared of her, right? That's also a big part of it.
I think they're definitely scared.
Within a matter of months, they literally have gone to the barrel of because you won't respond to Ben Shapiro harassing you, you're Sarah Palin.
There's two things that are going on, and I appreciate the call, Jack. But your phone stinks. There's two things that are going on. One, the excitement that she generated was outsized based upon what she's done at this point, right? She won a big election, a low turnout election. She was able to mobilize a lot of Bernie style voters in a district in Queens. She knocked off a guy who supposedly had a machine, but didn't necessarily have a machine that would work in those circumstances. But she was also a very well-spoken, intelligent candidate, and so generates a lot of enthusiasm, outsized enthusiasm and excitement based upon, you know, she's not even Congresswoman yet. And so I think the part of the pushback is a function of that. They're afraid of how much excitement she's generating.
Are they comparing her to Sarah Palin because they think she's dumb or because they think she's an extremist? Because
Dumb.
Probably
Dumb. No, in policy uninformed. That's how they're doing it.
I mean, Sarah Palin, even an extremist, as much as did she even espouse enough policy?
I mean,
like drill, baby, drill.
I think her policy leans pretty far to the right.
Gun.
No, but
She was sort of a prefiguring of the Trump phenomenon in many ways, right?
That's totally true, but I'm saying if
What's
they were gonna
Trump's policies?
Well, they would. Well, here's the comparison they would make if they were trying to say it was about extremism and not an implication about intelligence. They would go with Bachmann. Like Bachmann is insane, but she would say has a much more kind of thoroughgoing.
Oh yeah, no.
Christian
Sarah Palin. When people say Sarah Palin, they're saying
they're thinking stupid,
inexperienced, completely unqualified for the job that she was appointed to.
But great at freestyling.
Not great at freestyling.
Right. Winging, bitter, clinging, proud clingers of our guns are God in our religion.
But yeah, but she got that from, what did she?
She got that from Iggy Azalea, yes.
she got that from Marcus Bachmann.
Calling from a 585. Calling from a 585 area.
Hey, Sam. Hi, Sam. This is Rebecca from Boonville.
Hi, Rebecca. What's on your mind?
Well, I just wanted to let you know that yesterday, our horrible President Trump was in Utica, and 1,700 of us, including myself, were on the streets protesting. And it was fantastic to see so many people in the Utica and surrounding areas protest his attendance there. So it was really cool to be part of the protest.
Awesome.
And following that, and this was an event obviously for Claudia Tenney, and her opponent is Anthony Brindisi. And following the protest, there were over 500 people that attended a fundraiser for him. He's only taking, he's not taking any PAC money, any corporate money, and just taking small donations. And there was just a huge turnout for his fundraiser. So we're keeping our fingers crossed and continuing to canvass and phone bank and do everything we can to get him elected and Tenney out.
Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear it. He was up there.
Yeah.
Is this, was he making fun of Andrew Cuomo? Do we have that clip?
No, he.
It's tough.
That's so bad.
Yes.
Whenever Trump gets in on people like Andrew Cuomo, that's like that part of you that reminds you of why he was so fun for a minute.
Yeah. Here is. Here is Donald Trump daring Andrew Cuomo to run in 2020, and I gotta say, I hope this doesn't encourage Cuomo to run, because it would be a real nightmare. Rebecca, I appreciate the phone call. We're going to play this clip. Thank you so much.
Nice and wide, let everybody flow in, and they think they're going to be Democrats, right? They probably are, maybe, who knows? They might not, but they want them to come, and that's one of the reasons. I really believe that's one of the reasons, because a lot of other reasons don't make a lot of sense, but they want open borders. They don't mind crime because it comes with open borders, so obviously they don't mind crime. They hate ICE because ICE, is rough and tough, and that's what we need with certain kinds of people. I don't think that MS-13 fully understands the niceties of life. Do you think? So these people are great people. These are great people, but they're strong people. They're tough people, which is what we need. They don't like law enforcement. They don't want to take care of law enforcement. They don't take care of our military. They don't want to take care of our vets. Other than that, they're fantastic. Do you agree with that? Other than that, they're wonderful. But
pause it. I just want to be like this is a fundraiser, right? This is the big money Republicans.
Oh yeah, there's no difference. This is the base. Actually, should we do our own version of this sometime? Like, hey, other than being a corrupt, grotesque racist who borderline muses publicly about wanting to have sex with his own daughter and is a narcissistic trust fund baby who's ruining the country, Donald Trump's a great guy.
Indeed. Let's
Big gun plant. How far is that down the road? Where is it? 1 mile down the road? Well, you better be careful because they want to end your Second Amendment, and they're putting a big move on it. And Cuomo wants to end your Second Amendment more than anybody. Cuomo wants to take away your Second Amendment. Now, he called me and he said, I'll never run for president against you. But maybe he wants to. Oh, please do it. Please. Please. He did say that. He did. And maybe he means it. The one thing we know, and they do say, anybody that runs against Trump suffers. That's the way it should be.
Well, first off, they don't say that, but they also say they do say anybody who is in his orbit suffers, right? I mean, have you ever seen
your family, your friends, your
friends,
associates, your country?
Ask Manafort or Gates,
ask
or
Michael Cohen,
Flynn or Cohen, or Omarosa, or
his wife,
or Sean Spicer. What's he doing these days? Or Seb Gorka, who's having to make his own fake business cards.
He is good at delivering sick burns to people we also don't like, though.
Yeah,
gotta hand that.
I just hope that doesn't.
He's fallen off a bit lately, but I feel like he's gonna make a comeback.
I have to make a request. If Andrew Cuomo really did say that to you, presumably you talked over the phone, and I'm ready for a Lindsey Graham follow-up.
Yeah.
Give us Cuomo's
Or
number.
I hope
Come
Cuomo
on.
recorded it. All right, here's this is the final call of the day. Calling from a 203 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Oh, God, Sam, thanks so much for answering my call. My blood pressure is super high. But I'm Liz from Pennsylvania.
Hi, Liz from Pennsylvania. Please do not have any type of medical emergency while you're on the phone with us.
All right, I'll try not to. So I was going to call about, well, there's this meme going around that I saw on Facebook about Space Force. And it says something like, I have a question about Space Force. When is Puerto Rico getting electricity?
Yeah.
And so I know you guys were talking about that yesterday. And I have been kind of trying to avoid a lot of news lately because, again, the blood pressure. So I had this idiot on my Facebook tell me that they'll get electricity when their governor allows them to. So there was like an exchange, and it was incredibly frustrating. And thankfully, another one of my friends sort of took over and put this moron in his place. But so I was wondering if you guys could sort of aggregate all of the super important points on that and just sort of deliver them to me in a nice little package, because so much has happened and so much time has gone by, and I have just kind of lost the will to even listen to it. So what's going on with all that?
The last dispatch I heard was from Nomiki Kunst. I think when she last time was she on? Was she talking about that? Because she had just come back from there, and maybe we should have her back on to see if what the update is. But I mean, I don't know what the number is now, but there's still like a significant portion of the island that doesn't have electricity. I know they're a little bit worried right now because it's hurricane season, I think, still. Beyond that, I don't know anything. I haven't seen any recent reporting.
Well, so as far as like the recovery efforts, though, I'm wondering. I know you guys have talked about this before, but like, what procedurally needs to happen, like as far as Congress, or in theory, what executive orders could be signed, like in order to provide Puerto Rico with aid?
Well, just distribute money would be a big part of it. and send more money, send more resources down. I mean,
And
you could
stop the austerity. I mean, not only they're not doing that, they're suffocating the
right.
place.
And you could suspend. I think is it the Jones Act?
I think it's the Jones Act.
They did
right?
that for a week. You could do that. Well, you could repeal it. Which basically prevents ships from going directly to Puerto Rico if they are foreign ships. They got to stop at a U.S. port first, and then they got to go from that U.S. port to Puerto Rico. That increases the cost significantly of goods and makes it harder to get, stuff that could help in terms of building the infrastructure. I mean, so those would be the two big three or two or three things that you could do.
Right. And I would assume that like the same would go for Flint.
Well, for Flint, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's slightly different. They theoretically should have the money in the state to repair it. And, they've cut back sort of like the temporary measures, like you're not getting free water in Flint. In Puerto Rico, you're not getting as much, FEMA's not providing the same amount of housing. So, I mean, money is just the general way that you could express it. But, part of the problem is that it's just not in the news as much. And, it's sort of inevitable in this, media climate that would happen. But
Can I say one thing about Space Force?
Right.
So I asked our guest on the Antifada this week, Comrade Communicator, what his take was on Space Force. And I really thought he was going to go off in some wacky direction about how the Trump administration knows something we don't, about the existence of space comrades that are going to come down to Earth and give us full communism, and they're trying to intercept it. But his answer was actually very prosaic and terrestrial, and something I hadn't thought of yet, which is that this is a new branch of the military that Trump is going to have complete control over, staffed by his hand-picked loyalists, and it's going to be very well funded. So that alone should be cause for concern beyond the wacky logos and space stuff.
Yeah,
I was just gonna say that the logos are so unbelievably pathetic.
I appreciate the call. It's unclear to me that how exactly what the structure is going to be and how real it's going to be. It's going to inevitably be which company has been nice to me, they're going to get the contract for a space tank or something. There'll be something like that. I mean, I don't know.
Space tank.
I haven't seen I don't know how you fund that, right? So the budget is passed, the military authorization is passed. None of that money was earmarked for the Space Force. So he's saying to the military, carve it out of what your existing thing is. It's hard to imagine there's somebody there going oh yeah, I want to carve.
Yeah, nobody wants to lose their budget. But
So,
I
we'll see.
get this sense when I looked up those other programs, like the Space Force in Russia and China, that some of it's not technically real because it's basically like Air Force functions. It seems like Air Force and NSA functions.
Yeah, which
is
surveillance,
and it's disturbing enough. But I mean, I don't know. More military boondoggles, more surveillance.
Definitely something to keep an eye on, though.
Oh, without a doubt. All right, folks, we will see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. into you while I shifted in